So, last week I was talking about the idea of signature sound or a sonic signature and how we're always trying to create some balance between being original and fitting in with existing ways of doing things. This week I want to talk about how we use ideas that come from outside the world of music and how these can also help us both to be original and to fit in. Of course, this also relates back to the idea of convergence and divergence, of belonging and not belonging, that I mentioned in the third of these videos. So there's a long history of music that's inspired by ideas other than musical ones. A lot of instrumental music, from the Chinese qin or lute music through to European orchestral art music, uses visual images or language-based storylines. So for example, qin composition titles like "The General Slowly Removes His Armour" or "The Old Monk is Sweeping the Courtyard," or Mussorgsky and Ravel's versions of pictures at an exhibition based on visual art, or even various symphonies that are described as pastoral. These are all examples where the energy, the narrative, or the gestural shapes we hear in the sound are meant to summon the impression of some external image. Of course, they work in reverse too. By giving them a title, we try to interpret the music with the title in mind, creating metaphorical connections that we might not otherwise have made. The types of inspiration that are drawn on can be from ideas as well as from experience. Musical serialism in the 20th century created a new music theory in which every note of the chromatic scale occurs equally often as every other note. And others have turned to the Fibonacci series, the harmonic series, and other ideas and mathematical principles to structure their music. In early Chinese music from the imperial court, each new emperor would have the musical instruments retuned or replaced based on calculations of the royal astronomer so that the music was in tune with the universe. And that brings us to the question of how audible these things might be when they're embodied in the musical structure. The use of any systematic approach will produce a musical character which we may like or we may dislike, but there are also two possible drawbacks to this. Firstly, the character might only be subtly different from other characters that I'm familiar with, so I might not hear it as different or new. And secondly, in most cases, while I might hear the character, I can't recognize the nature of the idea that's causing the character without being told. So when music written using the Fibonacci sequence, I might like the way it sounds, but I'm unlikely to be able to recognize the mathematical principles just from hearing the sound. Of course, that might not matter, and we might use titles or program notes to let people know, like we were talking about above with places and styles. In popular music styles, the idea of evoking the character or characteristics of place and people is also common, but the use of abstract ideas is less so. Although there are examples, the idea of minimalism in techno came from the world of architecture and design through the US minimalist art music movement. Lyrics in popular music are unsurprisingly influenced by ideas from literature. For example, William Burroughs' surrealist cut-up technique of cutting up texts and reassembling them into a new and random order was used by artists such as David Bowie, Tom York and Kurt Cobain, among others. And Aphex Twin has explored various ways of using ideas from outside music as structuring principles. For example, in his track Bucephalus Bouncing Ball, he's used the sonic shape of a bouncing ball to shape electronic sounds that repeat while getting faster and quieter, like a ball that bounces less high on each successive bounce so that the sounds get closer together and less energetic. Looking more specifically at production rather than composition, we can evoke both general and quite specific senses of place through the use of ambience, like the reverberation of a church in the Rolling Stones' "You Can't Always Get What You Want," or the sound of a supermarket tannoy in Eminem's "The Real Slim Shady." The use of more abstract ideas, such as mathematical principles to structure the setting on processors, for example, may well produce a character that we can hear, but we may not be able to hear what the principle is. So we might add a delay to a melody line where the length of the delay changes based on the note in the melody. And we might like the sound it produces but not recognize what the principle is until or unless we're told. Using my Failing Upwards album as an example, one of the ideas that I'm experimenting with for the 70-minute long continuous mix of the album is to use different mix techniques based on when the lyrics are in the first or second person, using I, we or you, than when we're in the third person, he, she, it or they. I'll play the video out with an example where I use dub and sampling techniques under the first and second person lyrics and more realistic or transparent techniques under the third person lyrics. Next week, I'll be talking about vocal production as a songwriting tool. See you then.
Well, it seems pretty stupid that the world goes up in flames while the Lord